think the distance enough that you won't hear me in the mask. I'm not that loud. Shana Tova, and I want to thank Cantor Jackie for the opportunity to speak this morning. The holiday of Rosh Hashanah has several names and themes. One of them is Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. On this day, the existence of every living being comes up before God, and God decides the fate for the coming year. The Torah reading and Haftarah reading for both days of Rosh Hashanah are all defined by this theme of remembrance. It's not remembrance, it's remembrance. Important. On the first day of the holiday, the Torah reading begins, God remembered Sarah. It is the story of the birth of Isaac after his mother Sarah had been childless for most of her life. In the Haftarah, we read the famous and highly moving story of Hannah, the mother of the great prophet Samuel. Not only was the great prophet, but it's the story I love teaching most when I get to teach something long. I love the story of Samuel and going to David. Like Sarah, Hannah was also childless for many years. Our sages tell us that the blessing of a child for both Sarah and Hannah was granted on Rosh Hashanah, when the remembrance of their plight came up before God. Hannah was married to a man named Elkanah, and he was a righteous and important Israelite. He was from the tribe of Levi, and he lived in Ephraim, in the territory of Ephraim. And he married Hannah. Elkanah was best known for the mitzvah of, it's called Aliyah LaRagal. It was during the 3 festivals of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. He went up to the ark, which was currently in Shiloh, and in order to bless God. And he was so devout about leading the pilgrimage, he would bring his entire family, and he asked many other Israelis to join him and encouraged many to join him. So we must think of Elkanah as being the first tour guide, but a notable Jewish occupation. But he encouraged everyone to go. Hannah, as I said, was childless, and it's interesting, we have someone like Hannah also following the footsteps of Sarah and Leah and Rachel, all of whom had difficulty having children. So what did Hannah do? She did the same thing the others did. She arranged for her husband to marry a second wife, in this case, a woman named Peninnah. It's obviously a difficult step for a person to have their husband marry a second wife. I have suggested to my husband many times that if he could find someone who would come in and clean 2 days a week, do all the cooking and laundry, it would be perfectly acceptable for me, for him to find a second wife. It's not, I even use the Torah and Haftarah as an example. However, this was very difficult for Hannah, but she hoped that she would be, by allowing her husband to marry a second wife and have children, that she would be rewarded with a child. Peninnah gave birth to several children, but Hannah still remained childless. On one particular Shavuot holiday, when they went up to Shiloh, it was, when food came, it was the obligation of the husband to divide food into portions and give portions to each of the children and to the wife. And although he loved Hannah, and he could only give her one portion. She was only one person, but Peninnah had all of these children. So Hannah had to sit there and watch Peninnah surrounded by her children with all of this food, and here she was alone with her one portion of food. And to add to this anguish, Peninnah would taunt her and wouldn't be nice to her. Our sages later said, oh, so Peninnah would force Hannah into asking for children to God. But we don't know. We cannot tell what someone else is thinking. So she wasn't she wasn't nice to her, and that's an even harder thing to think about. Her husband tried to comfort her and said, "You're enough for me, I love you very much. Children will be great, but it's you I love." She wasn't going to be consoled with that. One quiet afternoon, after the service took place in the tabernacle in the mornings and then in the evening, but after the meal, there were few people around the tabernacle, and the newly appointed priest, Elaine, was sitting at the entrance to the courtyard, and it was very quiet and tranquil, sort of like it's going to be between 12 and 3 this afternoon, quiet and very tranquil. And this broken-hearted woman walked into the sanctuary and, facing the Holy of Holies, broke into sobs. She was speaking in a whisper, but she spared no words, and she spoke straight from her heart. She took an oath that if God would only feel her pain and grant her a child, she would consecrate him to God for all the days of his life. And what transpired next is one of the most famous ironies in all of the Bible. Observing this unusual scene, the priest concluded that this woman, showing such emotion and such fervor and such sadness, well, it could only be one thing: she was drunk. And so he went over, he seeing that she was under the influence of alcohol, went over and confronted her, and he said, "You're praying in a whisper. People do not pray in a whisper. They don't do this, they don't do that." And the Amida, which we just completed before we did this, that's now said in a whisper when we say it very softly in honor of this. And Hannah said, "I did not have any intoxicating beverage, and you, the high priest, you have no authority to accuse me of this. It's egregious conduct, and I didn't do it." And she explained to him how bitter she was over the fact that she didn't have children and how mean Penina was to her. And she said, "I'm pouring out my soul to God, and you think I'm a drunk." Upon hearing this, he immediately retracted his position, and he only changed his tone, and he tried to appease her, but he blessed her. And he almost promised her that God would accept her prayer and give her a child. And we learn from this that if one suspects somebody of something he's not guilty, you must not only appease him, but you must also bless him. As you know, I feel that the Torah is relevant if you can find something for today and not look at it as past history. That you have to find something relevant today, or it's reading the Gilgamesh epic. And so what I found most interesting about this was the idea of assumption, that Eli the priest assumed. We all know what assuming does. We've all heard that. But we all make assumptions, and some more than others. It is said that there are only two things that two Jews can agree on, and that's how much a third Jew should give to the synagogue. My husband, many years ago, was asked to go visit a family that was living lavishly. He went to see them. They showed him lovingly the new den they put into their home, the new car. They were buying a boat. They had just gotten back from a trip. And he, knowing what they pledged for the high holidays, looked at him and said, "Oh, Rabbi, don't make assumptions. You assume that these are all assets, but we have to pay for them. Rabbi, these are liabilities. They are not our assets." Again, the idea of what a false assumption can do. We need to really see, and not assume. We need to, as Kendra Jackie so eloquently expressed last night, we need to listen to facts and not assume that we don't have to listen because we know all of this already. We need to give people a chance to prove themselves, to prove ourselves, and not assume, as it said, facts, not an evidence. I am always saying, don't let the gray hair fool you, because of the assumptions that people make about seniors. We make assumptions based on gender, on race, on sex, on age, a whole salad of misinformation. Let's stop. Let's try this year to achieve knowledge, to know truth, and practice tolerance. Excuse me. My mother of blessed memory used to come up with the most outrageous assumptions and say, well, they say that. And I would say, who are they? Well, they were they, probably Fox News. But she would always say, oh, I'm sorry, could you hear me? She would probably say, that you hear people all the time making assumptions and saying, well, they said it was true. You must listen for yourself. If we practice tolerance, if we look for the truth in this new year, if we do, then this story, this beautiful story, becomes as relevant today as it was when it was written. And the Torah lives within all of us. May it be so. Shana Tova.